Hi, Ozzy here. Is religion or religiosity a mental illness or the result of mental illness? That question suggests itself to quite a few people who are critical of religious faith. The reason is fairly obvious. Many or most religions make extravagant metaphysical claims about reality, some of which seem quite divorced from reality because they're poorly supported by reason and evidence and, as such, seem to be believed quite arbitrarily. Couple that fact with the fact that very many religious people express a degree of confidence which far outstrips the quality and quantity of the evidence they offer up for their dubious metaphysical claims. And it makes them seem even more irrational. And given how it is belief, by which I merely mean that which one takes to be the case, given that it's belief that animates us and motivates our actions, such irrationally held beliefs often translate into irrational behaviors. So it's unsurprising that what one might infer some connection, even possibly an identity between irrational religious beliefs and the irrational beliefs and actions which result from a mental illness. But is the existence and prevalence of irrational religious beliefs to be explained by appeal to the concept of mental illness? Well, much might hinge on how one would define mental illness. But whichever specific definition and criteria of mental illness one might think applicable here, it's important to understand that, irrespective of the specific definition and criteria one might apply, the concept of mental illness is itself a concept of a mental disorder. That is, whatever else one thinks is ingredient in the concept of mental illness, it's a normative concept, one which describes how something has gone wrong, a deviation from the normal and healthy functioning of the mind, a malfunction of the mind. The concept of mental illness implies that there exist healthy, normal, properly functioning minds, and there are those who, unfortunately, whatever the causes, be they neurological or psychological, have minds which do not function as they should. In other words, the concepts of mental illness or mental disorder are the counterparts to the concept of mental health. This is sometimes referred to as the medical model of mental illness or insanity or psychological distress. To speak of mental illness is to posit some deviation or failure relative to some proper, normal, and healthy operation of the mind. In just the same way that a disease in the rest of one's body is seen as a deviation or failure relative to some presumed standard of normal, proper, and healthy operation of the body. So, when someone posits that irrationally held religious beliefs, or religiosity itself, are the result of a mental illness, or actually are a mental illness, they're actually claiming that irrational religious beliefs and religiosity are the result of some malfunction, and that these beliefs are to be causally explained in terms of some neural or cognitive malfunction. Whether that malfunction is to be described at the level of neurological events or some higher level of psychological description. So, what reason is there for thinking that the religious are suffering from some sort of mental malfunction? The reason that's most commonly cited in support of this alleged mental malfunction is that the religious often hold beliefs which are false, and not only false, but insufficiently warranted, drastically unwarranted, sometimes entirely unwarranted and divorced from evidence, and possibly even demonstrably false, even perversely resistant to disconfirming arguments and evidence. And so they are profoundly irrational beliefs. The religious are alleged to be in the grips of a delusion, and so they are literally deluded. Meanwhile, people who are decidedly mentally ill, such as a diagnosed schizophrenic, are said to be delusional, laboring under delusions. And because the religious, so the argument goes, operate under delusions about reality, they too are delusional. Ergo, they're probably mentally ill. Delusions, beliefs that are unwarranted, uncoupled from reality, divorced from evidence, possibly even demonstrably false, resistant to disconfirming evidence and reasons. These are the things we sometimes see in the delusional mentally ill, and we see delusions in the religious. and so the religious too must be mentally ill, so the argument goes. That, in essence, is the usual case for claiming that religion or religiosity is a mental disorder. Now, I certainly won't challenge the claim that very many religious beliefs are irrational. But the issue here is not whether the religious hold irrational beliefs, but what explains why and how they come to hold such beliefs. A schizophrenic who believes his television is beaming messages directly into his mind and instructing him to do things is the unfortunate victim of some sort of cognitive malfunction. His beliefs are not merely mistaken, they're the result of something going wrong in his mind, presumably in his brain, according to the medical model of mental illness. Similarly, a woman who suffers from clinical depression and is having an episode of suicidal ideation, that is, suicidal thoughts and fantasies, is experiencing such thoughts because of some state of her brain which, compared to so-called normals in the rest of the population, constitute a kind of malfunction wherein she finds herself unduly discouraged and unnecessarily despondent by circumstances which would not induce such emotions and thoughts in a person with a healthy, non-depressive mind, or even in herself were she not in the throes of a depressive episode, or were her depression temporarily alleviated by antidepressant medications. Even if such a depressive state is quite natural for her, she's still considered to be suffering from a mental illness relative to the broader population, which serves as the normative standard, the standard of normalcy, which defines what a proper or healthy emotional, cognitive, and behavioral response is to life's circumstances. Her moods, beliefs, and behavioral dispositions, her beliefs, can be explained by appeal to some deviation from a norm, a deviation which is presumed to have its origin in some unspecified neural pathology, a theory which is lent some support by the efficacy of antidepressive medications. In other words, although a hallucinating schizophrenic and a suicidal clinical depressive may both suffer from beliefs which are mistaken and possibly even dangerously inappropriate, and they may engage in behaviors that are harmful to others or themselves and which make them miserable, what makes these clinical cases instances of mental illness is not that they have mistaken or unjustified or irrational beliefs, but that the cause or origin of these beliefs and behaviors is best explained by appeal to neural or psychological factors issuing from within the individual. The falsity and irrationality of their beliefs is attributable to something going wrong, some malfunction, relative to some normative standard of mental health in that individual's cognitive economy. The mentally ill, when they are suffering from delusions, aren't just mistaken or guilty of having unjustified beliefs. We all make mistakes. We all labor under false and unjustified beliefs. No, they're mistaken because something's wrong with their mental machinery. That's just what we mean by a mental illness. Well, what about the religious? How can we explain why a Christian fundamentalist or biblical literalist believes in so many things which seem to fly in the face of scientific, historical, and archaeological discoveries? How can we explain how a Muslim fundamentalist or jihadist believes himself to have an obligation to blow himself up in the name of his religion? How can we explain how a moderate Catholic comes to believe that ingesting a cracker during Mass involves a miracle of transubstantiation and constitutes the means by which one can commune with the transcendental creator of the universe? Is there any doubt as to how people in their billions believe and have believed these and other preposterous things for millennia? It's rather obvious. They believe these things because they were taught these things. They believe these things because they were taught these things are true by people they trust, usually their family and community. The people they have every reason to trust, who were themselves taught to believe these things by people they in turn trusted. We don't begin life as natural skeptics, blessed with good critical reasoning skills and cognitive faculties capable of evaluating abstract claims, and who only acquire beliefs if they happen to be well warranted. No. Rather, we begin as naive, uncritical credulists. We are born believers who, out of natural necessity, must trust those around us upon whom our very existence depends, and whose knowledge we're in no position to second guess until many years later, and then only to the degree that we have acquired some critical thinking skills of our own as our cognitive faculties slowly mature and develop. The religious, overwhelmingly, acquire their beliefs in just this way, by a process that is normal, natural, healthy, and universal. Beliefs acquired in this way may be hilariously and even tragically wrong, since such a process is not especially reliable as a means of securing an accurate map of reality, but it's not abnormal, nor does it constitute any sort of cognitive, neural, or psychological malfunction. It's simply suboptimal, because this typical means of belief acquisition, which is mediated by trust in certain sources, can result in a picture of reality that is woefully inaccurate, and sometimes even demonstrably so. Unfortunately, among the beliefs one can acquire in this way are beliefs about which sources are to be trusted, which sources are to be viewed with suspicion, which sources are to be dismissed or avoided entirely. Many religions, many philosophies, and many political outlooks include, as part of their belief sets, directives on which sources should be mistrusted, ignored, ridiculed, or flatly denied no matter what. Conspiracy theories are perhaps the clearest examples of this. Consider a conspiracy theories wherein contrary evidence is simply rejected out of hand, owing to the belief that such contrary evidence must be nothing more than disinformation and propaganda released to the public by the conspirators to cover up the conspiracy. Contrary evidence, therefore, comes to be viewed as yet further confirmation of the conspiracy. Now, clearly such a meta-belief, a belief about how one should evaluate sources and evidence, effectively insulates the conspiracy theorist from counterarguments and disconfirming evidence. Such an idea, once incorporated into the conspiracy theorist's cognitive economy, serves as a kind of ideological immune system which nullifies objections to the conspiracy before such objections can erode confidence in the conspiracy. And once a person has taken on board such meta-beliefs, beliefs about how one should acquire or revise one's beliefs and which sources are to be trusted and which not, he or she can find him or herself trapped in an outlook or worldview that is highly resistant to or even stubbornly defiant of contrary arguments and evidence. The results of having taken on board such beliefs is a perverse stubbornness and dogmatic posture in the very teeth of strong defeating evidence and arguments. This is not madness, but merely the acquisition of beliefs which happen to be revision resistant. This can look for all the world like something has gone disastrously wrong with a person's reasoning faculties, but it is in fact explained entirely by the very nature of the beliefs themselves, beliefs which are acquired in perfectly mundane, normal, and healthy ways. One's epistemology matters. It is possible to have a fully functioning, healthy mind, but have adopted beliefs which render one almost indistinguishable from someone whose mind is not functioning properly. Bad ideas are not madness, but they emulate madness. Bad software can make it look like the hardware has failed. Even when such belief systems are acquired in later life, such beliefs and meta-beliefs are invariably embraced because one finds that they are held by a significant community of trusted people who can, when asked, offer various apologetical justifications for these irrational beliefs. The operative principle here is, well, these fine people can't all be wrong, can they? Now, surely one may point out that there comes a point in life where one would hope that people would scrutinize the beliefs which they have drunk in along with their mother's milk, or unwisely adopted later in life from trusted individuals. But critical thinking doesn't come easily or naturally. Critical thinking consists of a set of cognitive tools and skills which we must learn and actively practice. Our capacity, our potential for critical thinking may be innate, but the degree of critical thinking proficiency which we actually acquire, our execution of critical thinking and our competence at it, is slowly acquired and hard won. usually the result of having had the good fortune of seeing critical thinking effectively modeled by someone who is skilled at it, or else benefiting from an education that stresses it, or else encountering the right sorts of books and videos and the like during the course of one's life. Thinking and reasoning comes as naturally and easily as walking and talking. But good reasoning and competent critical thinking, that's something we must learn with effort. It's more like learning to read and write than speaking. Given these facts, it's no surprise that people who have perfectly normal, healthy, and fully functioning minds can be wedded to extravagant metaphysical beliefs and committed to all sorts of invisible realities, especially if these provide placeholders for explanations to the profound mysteries of life, or offer consolations for life's hardships, and include some basis, even if it's specious, for values, meaning, and purpose. To posit mental illness as the origin of such ideas is simply surplus to requirements. The religious, with some exceptions of course, are perfectly sane. There's nothing wrong with their brains or neurochemistry, and they're not suffering, so far as anyone knows, from any sort of psychopathology. They just have their heads full of unwarranted beliefs, and more importantly, beliefs that serve to insulate their existing dogmas by permitting them to dismiss and discount reasonable objections and counter-evidence. That's what's most wrong with faith-based thinking. It mimics insanity. One doesn't need to be insane to hold irrational beliefs. And such beliefs, though hard to deracinate from one's belief set for the reasons already mentioned, can and sometimes do get evicted. And this explains why even strident dogmatists can cease believing their dogmas. One can have one's confidence in some of these meta-beliefs undermined and eroded until eventually the entire web of belief is in tatters. I used to be one of them, a Bible-believing, evolution-denying, young earth creationist who thought demonic principalities and powers were controlling the world, and who dismissed whole swaths of science and history as anti-Christian propaganda, lies from the lips of Satan himself. I wasn't insane then, and I didn't one day become sane. I just had irrational beliefs which were pickled into me, and those motivated me to apply my rather undeveloped critical thinking skills in a very selective and dogma-preserving way. And what intelligence and intellectual ingenuity I had was pressed into service to shore up and rationalize, preserve, and maintain my beliefs, not critically examine them. Motivated reasoning, confirmation bias, and other quite natural and universal cognitive dispositions made this all too easy. So one doesn't have to have a malfunctioning mind or brain to be in the grips of religious dogmatism, or foolish political ideologies, or simplistic conspiracy theories. That's what's so worrisome about dogmatism and irrationality. It's far, far worse than insanity, because irrationality and religious dogmatism can make even a sane person, a perfectly sane person, think and do things that one would otherwise have to be insane to think and do. And so this can happen to people en masse. Deeply religious dogmatists have nothing wrong with their minds or brains. They're just in the grips of false beliefs. And those beliefs furnish them with hugely powerful incentives to compartmentalize the use of their critical faculties, however well developed they may be. And thus they fail to apply their otherwise normal, functioning, healthy reasoning abilities to their dogmas. One might call them crazy as hyperbole, but this should not be confused with a literal mental malfunction or even systematic irrationality. As I see it, the claim that religion or religiosity is a mental illness or caused by mental illness would seem to rest on nothing more than the observation that the religious hold to some irrational beliefs and fail to consistently apply and abide by the most reliable belief-forming practices on offer. Well, people with mental disorders may indeed at times hold irrational beliefs and violate certain epistemic standards of responsible belief acquisition. But that doesn't mean that everyone who does so is doing so because of some breakdown in his or her mental machinery. Such violations of the norms of good reasoning and responsible belief acquisition are perfectly explicable by appealing to how normal people acquired their beliefs, by appeal to the native cognitive biases that form part of human psychology, and by appealing to the difficulty involved in learning and acquiring a competence at critical thinking and belief revision. This allegation that religion is a mental illness is, in my view, an expression of exasperation and defeatism, coupled with an effort to devalorize, invalidate, and even vilify the religious, without bothering to contend with their views head-on. One can legitimately say of a belief that it's a belief worthy of a crazy person, but to suggest that one must be literally crazy to dogmatically hold irrational, unwarranted beliefs is itself a position that's scarcely born of looking at the world or considering how people actually acquire such beliefs. It's nothing more than an inaccurate slur born of exasperation and discursive fatigue. What's worse, the allegation of mental illness is an instance of both the ad hominem fallacy and the genetic fallacy, since even a raving lunatic can have accurate and well-justified beliefs. One can't legitimately refute or dismiss a religious doctrine by claiming that it's the product of some breakdown in a person's mental machinery. Now, nothing I've said here should be construed as some sort of apologetic on behalf of irrational dogmas and superstitions or bad inferential practices. Bad ideas can and should be criticized. Ridiculous ideas can be ridiculed. But there's no purpose served in mischaracterizing false ideas or poorly supported ideas as a product of a psychological or neural pathology, when the thing that's most worrisome about a faith-based outlook is that perfectly sane people with completely normal brains and minds can come to believe manifest falsehoods and can do so en masse. People, by and large, come to believe in religions because they trust the people in their families and communities who impart these beliefs to them. That's not some sort of cognitive or psychological malfunction or the product of some neuropathology. That's how a properly functioning brain does and should work, which is why it's vital that we strive to disabuse people of their false, unwarranted, or harmful ideas, and to promote critical thinking, logic, and scientific values. There's simply no need, and it's false to fact, to suggest that people are religious because they're suffering from a mental disorder. The acquisition of false beliefs is easily explained and understood by mundane mechanisms of cultural transmission, natural cognitive biases, and the effort required for critical thinking, without invoking the concept of a mental illness. Moreover, the claim that religion or religiosity is a mental disorder or symptom of a mental disorder is not only inaccurate, it's a violation of the principle of intellectual charity. And most troubling of all, it misidentifies the very reason why a faith-based outlook is potentially so dangerous. As I mentioned in a recent video about how religious moderates sometimes inadvertently provide cover for pernicious fundamentalist beliefs, one of the most worrisome facts about irrational religious beliefs is that once acquired, they can move large groups of people, of perfectly sane people, to behave in ways which one would otherwise have to be insane to do. One doesn't have to be crazy to believe, say, or do crazy things. One only needs to believe enough falsehoods and accept enough bad epistemological principles. And such falsehoods and bad principles can and are taken on board by perfectly normal people through perfectly ordinary means without the presence or need for any mental disorder. And finally, it may be viscerally satisfying to some people to call the religious mentally ill, but it impedes efforts to loosen the grip of religiosity in our culture because it furnishes apologists with examples they can point to of atheists who live up to the very worst stereotype of the bitter, angry, emotionally driven, anti-religious bigot who'd rather dismiss religious positions than bother to challenge them on their veracity and justifications. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you for watching, and I hope this helps. How can we explain how a Muslim fundamentalist and jihadist believes himself to have an obligation to blow himself up in order to get to heaven and enjoy 72 virgins. Oh, fuck, I fucked that up. Cut.